The rain fell in soft, steady waves over the village of Wren Hollow, a forgotten place nestled deep within the emerald folds of the Pacific Northwest. Hidden between towering evergreens and fog-choked paths, the town clung to a rhythm untouched by the outside world. Life moved slowly there, as if time itself obeyed different rules under the canopy of ancient trees. That October evening, the sky hung low, cloaked in slate grey. Lanterns flickered in the windows of small wooden homes as villagers prepared for another cold night. But in one house at the far edge of town, unease lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Clara Reeves stood at the threshold of the back door, her hand resting on the frame, eyes locked on the forest beyond. At 17, she bore the weight of adulthood too early. She had grown used to it. After the car accident that killed their parents, she had become everything her younger brother Eli needed: sister, guardian, protector. "Clara," Eli called from inside, "you promised you'd help me finish the map." She turned. "Just one more minute. I thought I heard—" A rustle, a whisper, a silence too complete. She shook her head and shut the door. Inside, the house was warm, the air scented with old books and pine sap. Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by pencils and torn paper. His latest creation, a detailed map of the forest surrounding Wren Hollow, stretched across the floorboards like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Clara knelt beside him. "You've got the north path wrong. See? The brook bends here." Eli's eyes lit up. "You're right, but look what I found today, an old trail near the hollow tree. It's not on any other map. I think it leads somewhere." "You shouldn't be wandering that deep," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I wasn't alone," he muttered, eyes lowered. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Someone was there. I heard humming, like a lullaby, and—" "The trees moved." Clara stared at him, heart pounding. "Trees don't move, Eli." He didn't answer, just returned to his drawing, his hand tracing lines only he could understand. The next morning brought no sun. Mist hovered low, swallowing the ground. At school, the Reeves siblings walked the halls like shadows. The other kids didn't bother them. Not because they were cruel, but because Clara and Eli didn't quite belong. Not since their parents died, and certainly not since they started asking questions. The librarian whispered to the principal that Clara had been digging into old archives. Eli had been seen near the edge of the woods at dusk. The townsfolk frowned when their names came up. Too curious, too bold. That afternoon, Clara confronted Mrs. Halloway, the town historian, who owned the forest before the village was founded. Mrs. Halloway blinked, her mouth twitching into a nervous smile. "No one. It's always been here. But someone must have charted it, named it." "The forest doesn't need names," the woman said quietly. "It remembers on its own." Later that week, strange things began happening. Their dog, Rusty, refused to go near the back door. He'd growl at nothing, tail tucked, ears flattened. Lights flickered in the house, even when the generator was fine. Eli started sleepwalking, waking up with dirt under his nails and scratches on his arms. One night, Clara found him standing in the yard, barefoot, eyes wide, staring at the woods. "What are you doing out here?" she whispered, wrapping a blanket around him. "I heard the trees calling again," he said. She led him inside, hands trembling. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. 2 days later, the siblings vanished. No screams, no signs of struggle. The front door was unlocked, Eli's wooden whistle lying on the steps. Inside, breakfast sat untouched on the table. The map of the forest remained spread on the floor unfinished. The village erupted in alarm. Sheriff Mercer organized search parties. Volunteers combed through every path, every ditch, every creek. Helicopters came and went. Dogs sniffed. Deputies shouted. But not a trace was found. Only silence. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. Sheriff Mercer spoke in solemn tones about probabilities, about moving on. A small memorial was held. Flowers were left at the Reeves home, soon overgrown by ivy. And just like that, the village forgot. 12 years passed. But before we reveal the horrifying truth that lay hidden beneath the forest floor, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries and twisted tales you won't believe are true. Because what happened to Clara and Eli Reeves was never just a disappearance, it was a warning. The morning after Clara and Eli disappeared, the town of Wren Hollow awoke to an unnatural stillness. The usual chatter in the general store ceased. Doors stayed shut longer than usual. Parents kept their children inside, whispering warnings they refused to explain. Sheriff Donald Mercer arrived early at the Reeves residence. He walked the perimeter, noted the absence of footprints in the muddy yard, the undisturbed doorknob, the eerily quiet interior. His deputy, Caleb Ross, stood beside him, puzzled. "No broken locks, no forced entry," Mercer murmured, flipping through his notebook. "No blood, no signs of a struggle." "But it doesn't make sense," Caleb replied. "They were just gone." Mercer's eyes scanned the forest edge. "We'll bring in dogs, set up a grid. Maybe they wandered off." It sounded hollow even to him. By noon, the woods were filled with volunteers, dogs, and flashlights, but all they found was Eli's carved wooden whistle lying beside a mossy stump. It was dry, clean, untouched by weather. The detail unnerved Caleb. "This should have been soaked," he said. "It rained last night." Mercer shrugged. "Maybe it blew in this morning." The search continued for days. Helicopters buzzed above. Drones were deployed. Still nothing. And then silence. The kind that settles not from exhaustion, but from quiet agreement. The villagers stopped speaking about the Reeves children. Posters were removed. Their house remained vacant, but untouched. No one dared enter. Caleb couldn't stop thinking about it. Late nights he returned to the forest alone, flashlight in hand, retracing every step. Sometimes he thought he heard giggles, wind-shaken whispers. He told no one. Meanwhile, the town began to adjust its collective memory. When newcomers asked about the house at the end of Willow Lane, locals simply said it was abandoned, best left alone. But some remembered, especially the elders. Mrs. Whitlow, nearly 90, told her nurse in a moment of confusion, "The trees took them." Just like before. Before? Others spoke in hushed tones of things best not disturbed. Children who wandered too deep. Songs carried on windless nights. A hush that fell when the forest grew still. No one spoke openly, but everyone remembered. Weeks after the disappearance, Caleb found himself back at the Reeves house. Dust blanketed the furniture. The forest had begun reclaiming the backyard. Ivy crept along the porch rail. The map Eli had drawn was still on the floor, partially smudged. He knelt beside it, tracing the paths with his finger. That's when he saw it. Just above the hollow tree sketch, a tiny symbol carved into the paper. A spiral, etched with such precision it seemed burned into the page. He'd seen it before. The town's old church had a similar pattern on its stained glass window, an ancient symbol tucked between vines and biblical imagery. Most assumed it was decorative. Caleb had never thought much of it until now. Later that evening, he visited the town archives. The basement was musty, lit by a single bulb swinging above faded shelves. He pulled records, maps, town meeting notes. So many were missing, torn, pages blacked out with ink. But a few scraps remained. An old village ledger noted a ceremonial grove near Hollow Tree Road, later marked as restricted. No explanation. Just red ink across the page. Closed 1952. Even more troubling, a small note from the town's founding days described a harmony pact with the land. The entry ended with, "The offering must never be refused." What offering? As Caleb dug deeper, villagers grew colder toward him. Mrs. Kellerman, the librarian, stopped speaking when he entered. His neighbors no longer waved. Someone left a bundle of twigs on his doorstep, tied with red string. He didn't stop. His investigation led him back to the woods, to a clearing where trees grew unnaturally straight in concentric circles. In the center, the ground dipped slightly, as if something once sat there and had been removed. There, etched faintly into a nearby tree, was the same spiral symbol. Back at the station, Caleb found an old photo tucked between files. Sheriff Mercer in his early days, standing beside a young boy holding a wooden whistle. Eli. And Mercer's expression, tight-lipped, eyes not on the camera, but the forest behind him. Caleb confronted the sheriff the next morning. "What do you remember about the Reeves kids?" Mercer didn't look up from his paperwork. Not much to tell. They were seen, investigated, but something's missing. The forest, the symbols, that whistle. Drop it, Mercer said sharply. You're not from here, Caleb. You don't understand how this place works. Caleb stepped back, stunned. You mean we're supposed to accept they just vanished? Mercer stood, his face hardened. Sometimes things disappear. That's all. But Caleb knew better now. He'd seen enough to understand this wasn't a case of two missing children. This was something older, deeper, rooted not just in the soil, but in the soul of Wren Hollow. And it was far from over. 12 years had passed since Clara and Eli Reeves vanished. In that time, Wren Hollow changed in small but telling ways. A few new houses rose near the outskirts. The general store repainted its walls. The school installed security cameras that mostly collected dust. But the forest, as always, remained the same. Dense, silent, unyielding. The Reeves house, now nearly consumed by vines and rot, stood as a monument to what the town chose to forget. No one mowed the lawn. No one dared touch the belongings left behind. Local kids dared each other to get close, but none went inside. Not really. It was a haunted place in every sense of the word. Caleb Ross, now the acting sheriff, hadn't stopped looking for answers. Time had not dulled his instincts, only sharpened his resolve. He still kept the spiral symbol pinned above his desk. He still walked the woods some nights, flashlight in hand, whispering their names to the trees. One morning, after a violent storm swept through the valley, a massive old tree fell near the center of the village square. Its roots, thick as a man's waist, tore through brick and soil, leaving behind a gaping wound in the earth. As workers began clearing the debris, they discovered something beneath the twisted tangle, something that froze them in place. Two small skeletons curled side by side, arms entwined. The remains were tangled within the roots themselves, as if the tree had grown around them, embraced them. There were no clothes, no fabric, no decay, just bone and soil, preserved unnaturally. The bones lay too deep for accidental burial, too clean to be centuries old. Caleb arrived on the scene before the coroner. One look, and his breath caught in his throat. A glint of polished wood near the smaller skeleton drew his eye. Eli's whistle. It was unmistakable. The same carving, the same shape. Untouched by time. The area was sealed off immediately. Reporters came and went. Forensic teams from the state arrived, baffled by the impossibility of it. They estimated the bones belonged to two children between 10 and 17 years old. Both were undernourished, no signs of trauma. Cause of death, undetermined. Caleb didn't need confirmation. He knew. He stood over the roots, wind cutting across the exposed square, and whispered their names. Clara. Eli. A hush seemed to fall across the town in the following days. Those who had once dismissed the story as a tragedy lost to time now walked with lowered eyes. Conversations stopped when Caleb entered the room. The council called an emergency meeting, demanding control over the narrative. Ezekiel Branson, the village's aging leader, declared, "Let them rest." No good comes from disturbing the dead, but Caleb refused. This wasn't a grave, he said. This was a hiding place. Branson's expression hardened. You don't understand the balance of this town. Let the forest keep its secrets. Not anymore. The coroner's report raised more questions than answers. There were no signs of violence, no fractures. No indication of drowning, starvation, or poisoning. But the most bizarre detail was biological. Tree roots had grown through the skull of the smaller skeleton and the rib cage of the other, as if they'd been alive when the roots formed. The report ended with one word circled in red ink: inconclusive. Caleb began reviewing old police files, hoping to uncover something he might have missed. But he discovered large gaps, days without notes, logs erased or missing, voice memos corrupted. Mercer's reports from the investigation were particularly vague, as if someone had deliberately avoided documenting anything useful. He confronted the former sheriff at his cabin outside town. You knew, Caleb said. Mercer, now a graying man with tired eyes, nodded slowly. I knew we weren't supposed to ask. That's all they ever told me. Who's they? The ones who were here before us, the ones who listened to the trees. Caleb left, colder than when he arrived. Back in his office, he stared at the whistle resting on his desk, the spiral etched into the side now appearing almost deeper, as if time had carved it further. The community held a vigil in the village square. Candles flickered around the roots where the bodies had been found. Children clung to their parents. Elders mumbled prayers older than scripture. Some wept, others remained expressionless. Ezekiel gave a speech urging unity and quiet remembrance, but his words felt rehearsed, hollow. Caleb said nothing. That night, he returned to the Reeves house. The door creaked open with a groan, revealing untouched memories, a family frozen in time. On the living room wall, a faded photograph of Clara and Eli smiled back at him. For a moment, he imagined them still out there, running through the forest, laughing, free. But the truth lay beneath the roots, and something was still buried. The autopsy findings didn't bring closure. They brought questions no one in Wren Hollow wanted to face. Dr. Leona Hirsch, the state pathologist, met with Caleb behind closed doors. She tapped her pen nervously against her notepad as she spoke. The root growth through the cranial cavity and ribcage isn't just abnormal, it's impossible. Roots don't grow that way, not unless the bodies were somehow living tissue when it began. But even that doesn't explain the density or how they stayed so intact after 12 years. She paused. There's more. The bone marrow wasn't completely dry. It was as if time skipped them. Caleb leaned forward. So, they weren't buried. They were absorbed. Dr. Hirsch nodded reluctantly. Something preserved them. Something unnatural. Back in town, murmurs returned like an old fever. Children were kept home from school. Windows were shuttered earlier than usual. The whispers now held a name, the forest. Some swore they saw the trees shift when no wind blew, that the leaves whispered when no one was near. Caleb heard none of this secondhand. He saw it himself. The woods behind the Reeves house had grown thicker in the past few weeks. He had lived near them most of his adult life, but paths once familiar were now twisted, altered. One trail he'd walked for years led to a dead end, choked with brambles overnight. He needed answers. Real ones, not folklore. That's when she returned. Maggie Thorne stepped off the bus with a suitcase and a stack of old field journals tucked under her arm. She hadn't been seen in Wren Hollow for over a decade. Most believed she had died in the city, alone and mad. But Maggie hadn't died. She had watched from afar, waiting for the forest to reveal its next secret. She found Caleb outside the sheriff's office. "You have Clara's whistle," she said without greeting. He blinked. "How did you... You also have a symbol burned into your mind. And something clawing at your soul. Don't worry, that's normal." Caleb exhaled, unsure whether to laugh or pull his badge. Instead, he led her to his office. She leafed through photos, reports, the map, the autopsy. Her fingers paused over the spiral. "I've seen this before," she murmured. "I drew it in my journals. I thought it was a natural glyph at first, something formed by tree rings or moss patterns, but it repeats too often. Always in places people disappear. Wren Hollow is full of them." She unrolled a canvas scroll, revealing a map of the region layered with symbols and dates. "There," she pointed, "Clara's house, the tree that fell. And look, 7 others, all connected by these lines." "They form a circle," Caleb whispered. "A binding circle," Maggie confirmed. "This village isn't random. It was built on top of something ancient, something the founders didn't fully understand." He turned to her. "You said you studied this." "I was a botanist." "Until the forest stopped behaving like one." Maggie retrieved a worn book from her bag, Clara's journal, torn, water-stained, but legible in parts. "She left it with me before she vanished. I didn't show anyone. I didn't trust them. I still don't." The entries painted a chilling picture. Clara had sensed something following them. She described dreams of tree roots reaching for her feet, voices humming lullabies through the walls. Eli had become obsessed with drawing circles and symbols. He whispered to the forest, telling it secrets only he and it could share. One entry stood out. "They want Eli, they always did. I won't let them take him. I don't care what the old rules say. If I have to go too..." "So be it." Caleb swallowed hard. She knew something, she fought it. Maggie nodded. And the forest punished her for disobedience, but it didn't kill them. They were kept. In a way. He stood in silence, the weight of it all settling. "So, what do we do now?" Maggie looked out the window toward the tree line where fog coiled like breath. "We find the source. And we pray it hasn't woken fully." That night, Caleb walked to the Reeves house again. This time, Maggie followed. The backyard, once overtaken by weeds, now bore a strange symmetry. Patterns of bent grass and soil mounds. In the center, beneath the moonlight, a small sapling had grown where nothing had grown in over a decade. Its bark bore the faint image of a spiral. The journal didn't just speak of fear. It whispered of something deeper. Ritual, intention, design. Caleb and Maggie sat beneath dim light, poring over Clara's final entries, trying to piece together what the town had never spoken aloud. She kept returning to one phrase, Caleb said, tapping the page. "The root offering." Maggie nodded. "I've read folklore about such things. Ancient villages believed the forest needed balance. When something disrupted it, too much death, too little life, they offered a soul to restore it, but it wasn't random." Caleb flipped through old town records, scanning birth and death logs. Eli was born after 3 stillbirths in the village, a rare thing. People called him the miracle child. "He wasn't a miracle," Maggie replied. "He was the answer to imbalance. The forest chooses." And Clara must have realized that too late. The weight of that truth settled like cold iron between them. In her journal, Clara described how Eli had begun hearing the forest's voice, soft, melodic, filled with longing. He spoke to the trees, not as a child would to imaginary friends, but with reverence. He offered them drawings, whispers, songs. She feared he was slipping away, becoming less her brother and more something else. "They think I won't notice," Clara wrote, "the way they watch us, the way they follow Eli with their eyes but avoid mine. They've chosen him, and they expect me to just stand aside. But I won't lose him too." Maggie pulled out a folded town charter from 1876. The paper was yellowed and brittle, but the ink was sharp. It referenced the Pact of the Roots, a covenant made by the founding families. It allowed the village to grow, so long as the pact was honored when the signs returned. "The signs?" Caleb asked. Maggie pointed. They recorded them: failing crops, dead animals near the forest's edge, recurring dreams among children. "Sound familiar?" Caleb exhaled. 12 years ago, that's exactly what happened, before Clara and Eli disappeared. The pieces clicked together with dreadful clarity. The town elders had known. They hadn't lost Clara and Eli. They had offered them. Caleb's hands curled into fists. They sacrificed them to keep the rest safe. Maggie shook her head. Not just a sacrifice, a merging. The forest didn't consume them, it bonded with them. That's why the bodies were found that way, bound in roots, preserved. "But why the spiral?" he asked. "It's everywhere." Maggie turned the journal around, showing an entry Clara had scribbled over and over. "Spiral means cycle, return, repeat." "The spiral isn't just a mark," Maggie said. "It's a message. The offering returns." Over and over, Caleb stood, his chair scraping back. "We have to stop this, expose them, end the cycle." "They won't let you," she warned. "They've lived with this for generations, protected it, hidden it. You start asking questions in public, they'll silence you. Let them try." The next day, Caleb returned to the sheriff's office and unlocked a drawer he rarely opened. Inside were taped interviews, old reports Mercer had refused to log officially. One stood out, an unsigned report from 2013, the week Clara and Eli vanished. It described a meeting held late at night in the chapel basement, a gathering of 6 townspeople, including Ezekiel Branson. The topic: restoration through ancestral means. The final line read, "The girl suspects. We must act soon." He took the paper straight to Maggie. "They planned it, they acted, it wasn't nature, it was murder wrapped in ritual." "No," Maggie corrected. It was obedience. To a forest they feared more than they feared justice. That night, as rain fell again, Caleb stared at the Reeves house. The sapling in the yard had grown inches in days. Its bark now showed more than a spiral. It bore 2 faint handprints side by side. He felt the forest watching him. Inside the house, he found something new. A box buried in the closet floorboards. Inside were more of Eli's drawings, trees with eyes, people sinking into soil, spirals forming halos around children's heads. And at the bottom, a single line scribbled in childlike handwriting. The roots remember who they're owed. Caleb didn't sleep that night. The words scrawled in Eli's childish hand haunted him. The roots remember who they're owed. It was more than a warning. It was a ledger. And the village was still in debt. At dawn, Caleb met Maggie behind the old church. She wore a satchel filled with equipment, compass, notebook, soil test kits, and a battered voice recorder. "We need to find the original site," she said, "where the first offering was made." They hiked through thick brush beyond Hollow Tree Road, where maps no longer matched the land. Trees leaned at impossible angles. The air held a taste of copper. Eventually they stumbled upon a narrow trail hidden behind a veil of hanging moss. At its end was a clearing, unnaturally symmetrical. The trees formed a perfect circle. In the center stood a stone slab cracked with age but still upright. Moss covered most of it, but beneath the green was something unmistakable. A spiral, deep, burned into the stone. Caleb knelt and brushed the symbol with his sleeve. The moment his fingers touched the spiral, the wind shifted. Not a breeze, something heavier, conscious. The air thickened. The trees creaked as if stretching toward them. Maggie spoke softly. "This is it, the binding site." Beneath the altar, the ground sloped downward. They cleared leaves and roots, revealing a shallow chamber carved into the earth. Bones rested inside, not just 2, but dozens. Small, fragile, long buried. "They've done this before," Caleb whispered. "Again and again." Maggie's voice broke. "Children." All of them. As they stood in silence, a sound rose from the trees, a soft hum like wind through a flute. But it wasn't random. It carried a rhythm, a pattern, a lullaby. Caleb's chest tightened. "Do you hear that?" "It's not for us," Maggie said. "It's calling something back." They packed what they could and returned to town. That night, Caleb reviewed the evidence: Clara's journal, Eli's drawings, the coroner's report, the unsigned file about the chapel meeting, and now this. Together, they told a story more disturbing than anything the town had imagined. The forest didn't just accept offerings, it expected them. And when they were delayed or denied, it found other ways to collect. The next morning, Caleb returned to the altar. Something new had appeared, sprouting near the edge of the pit. A single red flower, vibrant, alien. Its petals pulsed faintly. He didn't touch it. Instead, he photographed everything and uploaded encrypted copies to a secure cloud. If anything happened to him, the truth wouldn't die with him. Back at the sheriff's office, he called Maggie. "Clara's journal mentions the altar," he said. "She said it felt like it was watching her." "It wasn't the stone," Maggie replied. "It was what sleeps beneath it." They agreed to confront the town directly. But first, Caleb needed leverage, something undeniable. They visited the town records room, demanding access to restricted files. The clerk, pale and hesitant, eventually surrendered a key. Behind the locked door, they found dozens of sealed documents, pacts, letters, maps. But one item stood out, a ledger marked "Offerings Confirmed." Inside, names, dates, ages. The earliest entry dated back to 1821. And the last, Clara Reeves, age 17, Eli Reeves, age 11. The ink was the same color used in modern town forms. Someone had added it recently. "They were never missing persons," Caleb muttered. "They were accounted for." Suddenly the lights flickered. A deep groan echoed through the building like wood under strain. Maggie grabbed the ledger. "We're not safe here," she said. "They know we found it." They escaped through the side exit and made for the Reeves house, where the sapling had grown even taller overnight. Its bark now cracked open, revealing inner wood marked with grooves, symbols, spirals, and 2 sets of initials. CR and ER. Maggie stared in awe. The forest isn't just remembering, it's recording. That night, Caleb dreamed of roots crawling through his window, wrapping around his wrists and throat, of a voice soft and familiar whispering, "Balance must be kept." He woke in sweat. Maggie was already waiting outside. "We're out of time," she said. "The cycle is returning, and if we don't act, it won't just be memories they bury next." The town meeting was called under the pretense of unity, healing, and moving forward. But Caleb had a different plan. He brought the ledger, the journal, the photos. Maggie stood beside him, silent, steady. The townspeople filled the chapel pews in stiff silence, murmuring as they entered. No one looked directly at Ezekiel Branson. Caleb stepped to the front. His voice was calm, but unshakable. 12 years ago, Clara and Eli Reeves vanished. We now know they didn't run away, they didn't get lost, they were taken. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Ezekiel shifted in his seat, hands folded tightly. Caleb held up the ledger. "This is a list. Names, dates, ages, children. All gone, not missing, offered. And not centuries ago. Clara and Eli's names are listed here in fresh ink." A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Caleb continued, "This isn't folklore, this isn't metaphor. The forest demands tribute. That's what we've been protecting. That's what the elders have been hiding." Ezekiel rose slowly. "You presume to speak of balance, Sheriff? You who've lived here a mere fraction of a lifetime? I speak for the children buried under stone. I speak for the truth." "The truth," Ezekiel said, voice growing cold, "is that Wren Hollow survives because we respect the pact. Others have tried to break it, and they vanished. Or worse, they were murdered." "No," he snapped. "They were chosen. The offering isn't slaughter, it's preservation. It's the only reason this village exists at all." The chapel fell into stunned silence. No one interrupted. Maggie stepped forward. "And how many more must be chosen before you're satisfied? You think you're keeping order, but you're feeding something ancient and cruel." A man stood in the back. "My brother disappeared in 79. No one ever told us why." A second voice echoed, trembling. "My niece vanished in the flood of 94. No body, no trace." Ezekiel's composure faltered. "You kept this town alive through silence," Caleb said, "but it's dying from the inside. Fear isn't protection. It's rot." "Then what do you suggest?" Ezekiel hissed. "We stop offering? Let the trees reclaim everything?" "We tell the truth. We stop the rituals. We find a new way." Laughter erupted, not mocking, but broken, bitter. "You think the forest will just let us go? You think it hasn't taken root in all of us already?" Maggie looked at the crowd. "It doesn't have to end in fire and blood. But we must break the cycle." For a moment no one moved. Then Mrs. Kellerman, the librarian, stood up. "I want to see the altar." Others nodded, murmured, agreed. Ezekiel shouted, "You will doom us all." But his voice cracked. The power was slipping from him. That night a group followed Caleb and Maggie into the forest, young and old, holding lanterns, trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. They reached the circle of trees, the altar, the pit of bones. No one spoke. Suddenly the wind changed. A violent rush tore through the clearing, scattering leaves, extinguishing flames. From the trees came a sound, childlike voices, distant laughter, cries, and then a hush. Clara's voice came first, clear, calm. "We are not forgotten." Then Eli's, softer, like wind between branches. "But the forest is hungry." Lanterns flickered back to life. Some villagers fell to their knees, others stood frozen. A woman sobbed. "I heard my son's voice. He died 20 years ago." Caleb stepped forward. "They're reaching out, not to punish, to warn. This cycle must end." Maggie knelt by the altar, placed Clara's journal at its base. "We return the truth. We return their story." From the woods came a final echo, whispered not in malice but in mourning. Balance can be broken, but it must be mended with will. The crowd dispersed in silence. Back in town, Ezekiel was gone, his house abandoned. No trace. Caleb knew this was only the beginning of reckoning, but for the first time in generations, the truth had been spoken aloud. It began with whispers. Then came the roots. Within days of the altar's revelation, Wren Hollow started changing. Thick vines sprouted overnight, winding around mailboxes and doorframes. Trees leaned unnaturally toward homes, casting twisted shadows across windows. The forest wasn't waiting, it was responding. Caleb stood on Main Street and watched as saplings broke through the asphalt. A woman screamed when her garden shed was swallowed by a sudden bloom of moss and thorns. No one could deny it anymore. The balance was shifting, fast and violent. "We've triggered something," Maggie said, examining a pattern of bark along the courthouse walls. "It's not revenge, it's correction." Caleb turned to her. "Then we finish what we started. We face it." The townspeople, once silent and fearful, now rallied. The truth had given them courage, or maybe desperation. Dozens volunteered to clear overgrowth, dig through the cemetery, and search basements for hidden documents. They uncovered more ledgers, faded letters, crude forest maps etched into slate. What they found was staggering. 6 more offering sites. 6 stone altars buried beneath generations of earth and silence, each in a precise formation, equidistant, forming a massive circle around the village. "It's a seal," Maggie explained. "We were living in a prison disguised as protection. The offerings were never for harmony, they were keys to keep something locked. And now the lock was failing." Caleb called a meeting in the school gymnasium. Families arrived clutching flashlights, surrounded by fog that now hovered even at noon. "We can't keep waiting for the forest to stop," he said. "We must speak to it directly, not with bodies, but with truth." A plan was formed. One final gathering, one last ritual. Not of obedience, but of apology. They would return to the central altar. Not to offer, but to release. Maggie, now the village's unspoken guide, taught them the original words recorded in the first settlers' journals, an invocation of memory, not sacrifice. They would plant new roots using seeds from the forest itself, not as tribute, but as a sign of willingness to begin again. As they prepared, the village changed further. The Reeves house collapsed overnight. The sapling in its yard grew into a full-grown tree within hours, bark twisted with symbols. Crows gathered in unnatural silence on telephone lines. Static filled the radios, whispering fragments of names: Clara, Eli, others long forgotten. The final night came beneath a blood-red moon. Hundreds gathered in the altar clearing, each holding a seed, a stone, or a piece of their own family's past. Caleb brought the ledger. Maggie carried Clara's journal. Wind howled around them, but no one ran. Caleb spoke first. "We were wrong. We were afraid. We obeyed silence instead of asking why." Maggie followed. "We're not here to beg. We're here to remember." Together they placed the ledger into the earth, followed by Clara's journal, then their own offerings. One by one, villagers knelt, whispering apologies and names of the lost. Then they planted the seeds. A hush fell over the forest. The wind stopped. Even the trees held still. For a moment, nothing. Then the ground trembled, a pulse like a heartbeat. The trees around the circle bowed gently inward, their limbs brushing together in a sound like soft applause. A glow rose from the soil, faint, warm. Dozens of flowers bloomed in seconds, bright and trembling. And from the wind came voices, not angry, not mournful, grateful. Clara's voice whispered, "You remembered." Eli's echoed, "We are free." The forest at last was silent. As dawn broke, the overgrowth receded. The vines shrank. The asphalt uncracked itself. The houses stood untouched. Wren Hollow breathed again, but nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed the ritual felt like waking from a long, fevered dream. Wren Hollow stood intact, but transformed. The forest no longer pressed against the village like a threat. Instead, it lingered at a respectful distance, observing, no longer demanding. The first sign of change came quietly. Birdsong returned, clear, bright and unfamiliar. Flowers bloomed in yards where only moss had grown. The air lost its weight, the silence its menace. But it was more than atmosphere. It was something deeper, something vital. The village moved with a new rhythm. Children began playing again near the square. Where the fallen tree had once revealed Clara and Eli's resting place, now stood a newly planted oak, already several feet tall. Beneath its branches, villagers left tokens, drawings, candles, notes, and ribbons. No one told them to. It simply felt right. That tree was different. Its bark shimmered faintly under sunlight. And on its trunk, where the spiral had once marked an ancient claim, now appeared the faint impression of two small hands pressed together. Maggie, watching from a bench nearby, said softly, "They've forgiven us." Caleb wasn't sure it was forgiveness, but it was peace. At the sheriff's office, he cleared out the files labeled missing. Those names now belonged to the village's story, not its silence. A memorial wall was created inside the school. Every name from the ledgers was inscribed in wood, each with a date, each remembered. The village council dissolved, no more secrets. A new charter was drafted, transparent, honest, protective, not of tradition, but of people. Maggie helped lead the effort. "We were never supposed to be keepers of ritual," she told the community. "We were supposed to be stewards of memory." One evening, Caleb returned to the clearing where the altar had stood. The stone was gone, replaced by a circle of wildflowers. A fox sat quietly in the middle, watching him with bright eyes before disappearing into the brush. He smiled. Not everything needed an explanation anymore. Still, he kept the journal and the ledger, not out of fear, but remembrance, to pass on what had been buried for too long. Some nights he still heard the forest murmur, but it no longer called out for payment. It spoke of balance, sought, broken and rebuilt. He visited the Reeves tree often, sat beneath it. Sometimes when the wind shifted, he heard laughter, and though it chilled his spine, it no longer frightened him. It reminded him of what had been lost, and what had been found again. Years passed and Wren Hollow remained quiet, but never dormant. Children grew up hearing the story of Clara and Eli not as myth, but as memory. The town didn't hide the past anymore. They honored it. Every spring, they gathered at the Reeves tree to celebrate what they called the Day of Renewal. It wasn't a holiday. It was a promise. Teachers told the truth. Parents answered questions. The spiral symbol became a mark of remembrance, no longer one of fear. It was carved into benches, painted into murals, etched gently into stone markers along forest trails. The forest, once a looming threat, now stood as a neighbor, respected, observed, but no longer obeyed. One afternoon, Maggie sat beneath the Reeves tree with a notepad in hand. Her fingers trembled from age, but her mind remained sharp. She was writing her final work, a memoir titled The Root and the Reckoning. In it, she detailed every moment, the whispers, the sacrifices, the silence, and the break. She didn't tell it as horror, but as a lesson. "Let memory lead us," she wrote, "not fear." Caleb read the manuscript before its publication. He wept through parts of it, not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because the story was no longer buried. It had roots now, it would grow. He had stayed on as sheriff longer than he planned. There was always something to fix, someone to protect. But over time, he transitioned into a new role, mentor, keeper of the town's modern truth. One of his favorite routines was walking the path between town and forest. The trail curved gently past the Reeves tree, now enormous and majestic. Children often played at its base, unaware of the history it held beneath its bark. And that, he thought, was how healing worked. Not by erasing pain, but by planting over it with something better. One summer evening, a boy approached him, 10 years old, wide-eyed, holding a folded paper. "Sheriff Ross," Caleb crouched beside him. "What is it, Nathan?" "I found this near the tree. It has drawings of spirals and names." Caleb opened the page slowly. It was a child's sketch, done in careful, deliberate lines. Spirals, yes, but they were different, gentler, each one surrounding a name: Clara, Eli, and beneath them the words, "We're still here." "Just not lost." Caleb smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. "You've got a good heart, Nathan. Keep listening." The boy ran off, laughing. That night, as the sun sank behind the hills, Caleb stood once more before the Reeves tree. He placed the drawing at its roots. The wind stirred, soft and steady. A thank you. He didn't need words, he felt it. Before we close this story, if you've been moved by Clara and Eli's journey, by the truth uncovered and the healing earned, don't forget to subscribe. These are the stories that remind us where we come from and where we must never return. And if you want to uncover another hidden truth buried in silence and time, click the video on screen now. Because some roots once exposed don't just reveal the past, they rewrite the future.